Hello and welcome to the Fostering Success Michigan webinar series, Champions of the Domains. My name is Maddie Day and I am the Director of Outreach and Training with the Center for Fostering Success at Western Michigan University.
Hi, my name is Bruce Simmons. I'm the FSM Student Ambassador, CETA Scholar at Western Michigan University.
Before we get started, we'd like to remind everybody that attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to ask questions using the chat feature or the questions feature. If you have technical difficulties, you can contact the Citrix team at the number on the screen. And as always, a recording is available of the webinar is available following the webinar, and it can be found on our website in the resource library. We would like to say a very special thank you to our funders, the Kresge Foundation, the Havermill Foundation, and Western Michigan University for their continued support of the Fostering Success Michigan statewide initiative. And now to today's webinar. Today's webinar is part of our Champions of the Domains series. This month, we will be focused on finances and employment. We have the Empowering My Success Program joining us today to share some insights from their program and with their students on today's webinar. Goals for this webinar are to explain why this domain is important, to highlight innovative practices used to support students in this domain, and to provide resources related to this domain. As always, we like to encourage everybody to get involved, to ask your questions, to make this presentation interactive. So don't forget to use the questions or chat feature throughout the presentation to interact. We do want to hear from you. We have somebody monitoring the questions and chat feature, so you can ask questions or add a comment at any point in time, and we'll be sure to make sure that we have time to include that at the end of the broadcast. So thank you and welcome to the Empowering My Success Program of the University of Michigan Flint. Hi Kayla, how are you?
Good, how are you doing, Maddie?
Great. Hi Becca, how are you doing?
I'm good, how about you?
Wonderful. Thank you both for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you and looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So before we get started, it's always important for us to just say a little bit about the 7 life domains. As many of you know, the 7 life domains is a framework that Fostering Success Michigan and the Center for Fostering Success use as a way to organize, understand, and develop a response to the complexity of the lived experience for our students with experience in foster care. The 7 life domains framework comes from the Casey Family Program's It's My Life framework, and as you can see here, we have all of the 7 domains arranged around the education domain. And so while we are an education advocacy organization, education is central to the work that we do. We also know how important it is to attend to all of the other life domains. And so throughout the school year, we take 1 life domain a month and really do a deep dive focus on that. So September was the education domain, October is the finances and employment domain. So a little bit more about the finances and employment domain. One of the things that we really focus on is how the finance and employment domain really speaks to the lack of accumulated assets that young people who age out of foster care have, and how this really impacts money management and also access to long-term things like savings and building up for long-term credit. Bree, do you want to say a little bit about kind of some of your insights around the finance and employment domain?
I think this is one of the harder domains for me as a youth who've experienced foster care and now alumni. And so I think it is important that we do take a month out of the year to focus and dive deep because some of the things like saving funds, how to file a tax return, things like that I didn't learn until later, and I wish I would have known them sooner. So I'm super excited today to dive into this domain and learn more about it.
Awesome. And just one more note, you know, we end up talking a lot about the finances side of this domain, and that's important for a variety of reasons. You hopefully know that the FAFSA is available now for students to begin completing, and we really want to encourage all students to complete the FAFSA. That's our prospective students who might be looking at going to college or university next fall, and our current students who are hoping to continue college college, but we also want to talk about employment and really paying attention to the skills that are needed to develop strong employment skills. Some of those things that we often don't think about that are related to this domain are job readiness, having a resume that speaks to the skills and the unique abilities that students have, and also just kind of some basic things like job prep, making sure that you make that great first impression. And so for this domain, there really are two sides, but of course they're very interactive. And one of the things that we often find is many of the other domains are very much directly impacted by the finance and employment domain. And so next month when we talk about life skills, we often have some very close overlap between life skills and the finance and employment domain. So it really is important for us to take some time out and kind of dig a little bit deeper, and hopefully you all are excited to join us as we dig deeper today. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started.
Before we start the questions, I want to remind you to use the questions or chat feature during the presentation to interact, because we really want to hear from you. And then I'm going to start the first question off, and both Kayla and Becca, we would like to hear from you for an answer. The first question is, what are the most significant challenges that students face in this domain? Kayla, you can go ahead if you want to start.
Sure, not a problem. Thank you. I would say from the standpoint of a professional that helps to support students who've experienced foster care, one of the most significant challenges that I've seen as students come through our program is the budgeting aspect of it. Generally what happens with the students in our program is that they suddenly come into a significant amount of support through ETV funds or education training voucher funds, and potentially some additional funds from financial aid. We have a really, really strong partnership with our financial aid department at the University of Michigan Flint, which definitely affords our students this opportunity that's not afforded to all students, so we greatly appreciate it. But there's also that flip side of what to do now that I have some money to support my basic needs and basic necessities while I'm going to school, and I think sometimes that can be really difficult.
Yeah, I think the same thing, because like once you're 18, you're in college, it's like I have all this money and I'm free, and a lot of them don't really think that they can only use it on certain things, so they go and they waste all the money and then they're stuck and they're like, I don't know what to do now, I don't know what I'm supposed to, how I'm supposed to pay for certain things, especially the students who have bills to pay. They don't really think about those bills, they think of like what they want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, it's one of those pieces that I think a lot of people this resonates with, this issue of you come into, more money probably than you've had before in your life, and I like that you said, Becca, it feels like all of a sudden you're free. And yet, you have these bills, you have these things that you actually have to pay first, but they don't maybe seem as, I don't know, relevant might be the right word, or just...
I think it's, from my perspective, it was more of like, I never could buy this, but now I can. So yeah, maybe I could pay my bills, but I also have always wanted this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the priorities aren't really correctly lined up.
Yeah,
is what I would say from experience.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, it's like it's easier to see that brand new coat in your closet than it is to
pay your rent and not see the money ever again.
Exactly. Yeah. So those are, I think, that to me feels like one of the kind of the most basic and really essential issues within this domain. So the next question that I have is, given this issue, and again, it's a complex issue, so I imagine that there's lots of strategies to address this, but what are some innovative practices or strategies that you all have used to address the challenge that we just discussed?
Within the Empowering program, we do a few different things. We always make sure to have at least one workshop for our students per year related to finances and employment in some way. So maybe that's money management, maybe that's working on resumes and getting a job, and then how do you manage the money from there. But we definitely try to have at least one of those per year for our students. During weekly check-ins with students, I'm generally asking, how are things going? Do you have what you need? And if you do have what you need, how much money do you have left, and how can we budget it out to make sure that it lasts you for the rest of the semester, and that we don't run into any challenges. The other thing that has been helpful as well is using some online resources and sharing those resources with students. So for example, one of the websites I really like is cashcourse.org. I would really recommend that people check that out. They have a ton of resources, and a lot of them are geared towards students, which is really helpful because we know as adults, and maybe we're out of college at this point, our financial situation looks a little bit different. We have really regular bills. We maybe have pretty regular income, where our students aren't typically seeing that or having that experience. So I really like that those resources can tailor it towards the student side of things, instead of making the assumption that everything is really consistent in their lives, because generally that doesn't happen.
Sorry.
I just had a quick question about the cashcourse.org. Can you go a little bit into detail about like why you 100% recommend, like maybe some features on the website? Does it allow for pie charts, like what it allows for that students might want to take a look at it?
I definitely think that the budgeting aspect in there is really wonderful, and kind of going back to what I said about tailoring it for college students. So it gives some really good options for things that and expenses that the student might not have thought of before. So something like books every semester, which generally doesn't come up in your standard budget for just your run-of-the-mill person. Or maybe you need to worry about, do you have a meal plan or do you not have a meal plan? We have to take that into consideration as well. So I like that option. I like the option to kind of configure in some of the funding sources like ETV that a student might have, because again, that's not something that a standard budget, if you bring up a template, would have on that document.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
I've never really been a person that had like a hard budget type thing, because I always grew up having to do what's important first versus what I want. So I basically just pay off what I need to pay off before. But my strategy is to make sure that I know how much I have, and then I pay off what I need to pay off first, and then I get what I want.
Mm-hmm. So kind of having your priorities lined up so that you follow through, and then you spend whatever's left, for fun, or put that into other things.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's a good skill to have.
Mm-hmm. Beckett, as far as how you prioritize, was that something that you just naturally knew, or was that something that you had to learn?
It's kind of a learning process, because I watched the way my parents budget, and I had to move from home to home because they didn't budget very well, so they would never be able to pay their bills. They would always go out and party. So I learned from basically my parents' mistakes.
Okay. I mean, it's great that you were able to take that wisdom and really, change it around and learn and, and make different and positive decisions for yourself. That's awesome.
All right, thank you for those answers, and we're going to move on to our next question. Before we do, I really want to encourage that our listeners and attendees use the questions or chat feature because we do want to hear from you. And with that, our next question is, what type of self-care do you encourage to support success in this domain? And then, Kayla, you can go ahead and start.
That's a great question, and self-care is really, really important. I think what Becca mentioned about learning to prioritize is almost a form of self-care in and of itself, which is really, really, really important. Being able to prioritize those funds and making sure that you have enough to cover the essentials and your needs and wants really kind of decreases some of that stress, makes it a little bit easier to get through school, homework, and all that stress that's already going to be inherently a part of college. So I think that's a really, really good type of self-care. I would also say that learning and using the skill of asking for help is also great self-care in this domain, and really any domain. There's a ton of resources out there that are available for students who've experienced foster care. whether they know about them or not. It's definitely the jobs of support programs and supportive professionals on campus to make sure to share that knowledge. But it's also great if a student's able to ask that question of, is there anything out there that I can be doing differently? Is there some resources like the Cash Course resource? Is there any funding options out there that I might not be tapping into that I could be using? And so I think in kind of a roundabout way, that's a really great self-care aspect as well.
Awesome. Becca, do you have some thoughts?
Basically I agree with Kayla, because once you spend most of your money, you don't know, like the way you eat, it's hard to eat very healthy with a limited amount of money that you have. So then you start stressing about, like, what am I supposed to eat? What am I supposed to do now? And stress can take a really big toll on your body. So you always have to make sure that you're not as stressed.
I think that's a really important awareness, because I think, a lot of times we can think, okay, so, self-care is related to stress. So I'm stressed, okay, I need to, go do some sort of self-care, take a walk, spend time, meditating or with friends, or, whatever your kind of self-care thing is. But what I hear both of you saying is really looking at the source of your self-care and doing some sort of preemptive activities and kind of skill building, I would say, maybe, so that you, in the spirit of ensuring that you don't get to that point where the stress is so high that you're, feeling overwhelmed. And I think it's a great thing to kind of look at what other skills can I pull into supporting success in this domain, so that, it doesn't end up with, as you said, Becca, kind of eating junk food on the couch because you feel like you can't go anywhere and you don't have any money to, have healthy food, and that just, you just don't feel great about yourself when you end up, making those choices. And so having that kind of foresight and foreplanning, I think, is really important. What thoughts do you have, Bree?
I think what Kayla said about asking for help, I think that is my biggest self-care in this domain, because I'm coming upon graduation, applying for grad schools and things like that. Money and employment both are really stressful. So I think just me having those resources and those campus support programs, and even other professionals and supportive adults to ask questions makes me feel a lot better, because I'm like, I don't know the answer, maybe they don't, but maybe together we can find someone who does. So I think, and I didn't really think of that as a self-care practice, so I'm glad that Kayla brought it up, because now I'm like, wow, and that actually does make me feel a lot better when I can ask for help and figure it out with someone else. And that way I don't have to do it alone, and we can maybe like have greater opportunities and different resources because it's more than just one person. And so I really liked that she said that, and I 100% resonate with that. So.
And, I think that kind of speaks to something that we always talk about is really engaging your network, and as professionals and supportive adults, we have the opportunity to share our network of professionals and other supportive adults with our students. And for students, that we want you to build a network of supportive people who can help you have access to different resources, and who can also support you in your self-care pieces. Because it's one thing to say ask for help, but that's hard. And so I think especially if you don't feel like when you ask for help somebody's going to be there. And so having that supportive network is a really important piece of successfully asking for help. So the last question that we have for you all before we open it up for questions, and just a reminder for everybody out there, please feel free to send questions, use the chat or questions feature, but is really kind of our one piece of advice for students, professionals, and supportive adults to increase success in this domain. And of course, we're always fine if you have more than one piece of advice, but yeah, we'd love to hear from the both of you, your thoughts on this.
I think one of the things that always comes to mind for me with finances and employment, considering that, like Bree mentioned, it's a pretty substantial domain for students that are in college, and also, like she had mentioned, getting ready to go off to grad school. There's a lot of concern and stress in this area. And for supportive adults and professionals, I think it's important to remember that it really does take a village to do this type of work in this domain. So there's no way that any one person, and kind of back to self-care for more of the professional side, there's no way that any one person can meet all of these needs for all of the students that they serve or the people that they support. It takes making those connections, finding resources, building a network, and really building an army behind you to make sure that you do have the availability, when a student comes to you with a question, to say that, yeah, I do have this person. I can't do this for you, but this person's great at it, and they can absolutely help. So even though we talked about self-care for students, which is really important, it's definitely important to look at the flip side of it in terms of self-care for professionals. And then in terms of a second piece of advice for students, I think that's one that I would love to hear from Becca on, because that's, again, I'll let her speak to that piece of it, but one of the things that I always like to do is just defer to the student for that perspective, because a lot of times the supportive adults or the professionals that are supporting youth that have experienced care may have not experienced care themselves, and that's a pretty significant experience to not have when you're working with students who have had that experience. So I'm definitely going to let Becca speak to the student aspect of that.
Well, it is kind of hard at first because you feel like you're alone when you first start college, because you had to already fill out most of your paperwork by yourself. You have no idea what you're doing. And I really like how empowering is behind all of their students, because basically if I have a quick question, I can always either text or call Kayla or send an email, and either her or Tanisha will get back to me really quickly. But basically a piece of advice I have for students is to make sure that you always prioritize, because I am currently taking 5 classes, so I have lots of homework, and I always stress myself out if I don't know when certain things are due. So I suggest to get a calendar or something that helps you plan out what is due when, or when do you have meetings or appointments. Maybe even write down how much you spent or what you should spend on this day and stuff like that, because it'll get away from you very quickly, and then all of a sudden you're in this big mess and you have no idea what you're doing.
That's great advice, and I think so both of those pieces, Kayla, you really talked about, and I loved how you put it. You can't meet all of the needs for all of the students all of the time, and that's just so true. And as professionals and supportive adults, I think it's a challenge that we can kind of fall into, where we think, oh, we can do it all, and the reality is our students actually need more than one person. So if we can step back and say, we don't have to do it all, let's welcome other professionals and supportive adults in this work, we're actually supporting our students in a bigger way to have more opportunities for support and success. And Becca, you're talking about prioritizing, planning ahead, and really writing out those expenses so you can see it in front of you. I think that's a really great practical strategy, practical piece of advice that can help everybody. So if rent is due every month on the 1st, even just having that in front of you can kind of be that reminder when you're thinking, maybe I want to spend it on this, but I know I'm going to need to spend it on that. Seeing the budget kind of in front of you, I think really helps to make sure that you're making those decisions in a way that is healthy and positive in the long term. I super appreciate both of those comments. Bree, what thoughts do you have?
I liked that Becca talks about a planner, because though we are in the finance and employment domain, I think a planner is essential for all domains. And so I just wanted to relate her 2 points, how she talks about writing it down, but then also having a planner or a calendar. When you combine those two together, I think that helps you in all domains, but especially in the finance and employment domain, because like Maddie said, you have a bill due, you write it down. Say you write it down in the planner. So you're looking at this planner every month, so you're seeing this reoccurring, okay, I know at the 31st my money is due. So like Maddie said, maybe you'll take a second guess when you're buying that candy bar, or you're like going shopping online. Like maybe you'll be like, oh wait, I looked at my planner this morning, said my bills are due the 31st, so I probably should not do that. And so I think those two, which unfortunately I learned the skill maybe 2 years ago, is putting those together and having it all in one spot that you look at every day will drill in the back of your head your priorities and your responsibilities and things like that. So that was a great two pieces of advice.
Awesome. So before we shift into questions that we have from the audience, I would really love to hear a humble brag from the both of you, and you know, something that we always like to celebrate, things that are happening in our network, you know, successes of our students, our supportive adults, and our professionals. And I would just love to hear from both of you something that you're excited about, maybe something cool that's happened, or you know, just something to kind of raise up and be like, this went really well. It could be related to finance and employment, as this is our domain for the month, or just something else you want to share with us before we open it up to the larger audience.
I'll go first on this one. This is something, if participants in this webinar had watched our Getting to Know Our Program webinar that FSM did earlier, or is going to be sharing, this is something that I mentioned in there, that I always like to humble brag about the relationships that the Empowering My Success program has with other departments on campus. For those that aren't familiar with our program, we only have 2 full-time staff, and we have 1 intern that comes in, and she's awesome, but she's only in 2 days a week. And so we really are a really small program in terms of our staffing, and we rely on those partnerships and networks and relationships to help support our students in not just the finances and employment domain, but in all of the domains. And it's really, really important, and I always like to, again, humble brag and call out those people and those departments. Financial aid has been wonderful. They completely get and understand to a level that I don't normally see some of the needs of students who've experienced foster care. And it's not just about paying for tuition and paying for housing. It's also about, I need to pay for food, and I need to pay for gas, and I need to do all these other things on top of that. And so where am I going to get that support? So great support, great partnership. So big shout out to them. And then also a really big shout out to our housing staff on campus. I know this somewhat relates back to finances and employment, but they do a really wonderful job of working with us. They know who our students are, and they're able to actually waive the housing deposits for our students to come live on campus, which is really, really helpful, because I believe this year it was maybe about $500. And that's an expense that nobody really expects, no matter what's your background. You know, if you're a college freshman, that's a big expense to come up with in maybe just a few short weeks. So that is so helpful, and that really helps us remove a lot of the barriers for our students in terms of that financial piece. And also, they're just wonderful people to work with. We're really, really fortunate on this campus to have maybe a more smaller network of, or I should say a large network of people that support us on a smaller campus. So that is pretty unique, and I really appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really not much of a person to brag, because I know like a lot of people have way worse than I do, but I really do like the housing, because I was basically moved into my dorm overnight because of how well our connection is, and I really am thankful for that, because I had to get out of the situation I was. And ETB and really has helped me a lot. Like, I just was able to be able to go out and buy new clothes. So yeah, I don't know what else to brag about.
I think those are pretty good things to brag about, and you know, as I spoke to earlier, the finance and employment domain really does. I mean, it's related to all these other domains so closely, and so speaking to, you know, the network of champions that you have cultivated at the U of M Flint campus so that they can support students in a variety of ways. I think it's so important, and that really goes back to, you know, having that network that you can ask for help, that network that builds the social capital to help, find employment and also find safe and secure housing. Making sure that you have a safe place to lay your head every night is a huge piece of education success. So thanks for those humble brags. It's always fun to kind of hear and give shout outs to the other people who are part of great work happening on our campuses.
And then with that being said, before we open it up from questions from the audience, we would like to ask the both of you if you have any questions for us.
I don't have any questions.
I think, I don't think I have any questions either, but that's a great question.
So we have a couple questions, and I think so. The questions that we have here, there's a variety of them: student questions, supportive adult questions. I think the maybe if we could start with the student question, and it's a little bit broad, but for Becca, how can I find resources to help me be successful in this life domain? And so, and this could be maybe, Becca, how did you find some resources, or maybe where do you go to find resources?
Most of my resources have come through MPowering, but I'm also part of MYOY here in Michigan. So most of my resources basically came through them, but really you can go to any advisor here at the university, and they have lots of resources too. And you can also come to financial aid, and they'll give you some tips of where to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And then we have a question for the professional. So for Kayla, what ways do you offer extra support to students trying to be successful in the finance and employment life domain, but they may be having some challenges?
I think that's a really good question in terms of extra support. One of the things I like to do is remind students, especially if they're in a tough situation. So maybe I'm thinking, for example, of a scenario where a student might come in and they're somewhat in crisis. We're kind of at a point where we're in a little bit of a deep water, and so we got to get out. One of the things that I always like to remind students of, again, going back to resources, is that we're really fortunate through our the funding through our grant for our program is that we have $300 in emergency funds for students to use. Sometimes I think students might forget about that because it's not something that we, talk about every day, but I remind them hey, calm down, let's reduce your stress levels a little bit. We do have this emergency funding if we need to tap into it, and we can definitely have that conversation if needed. So I've seen that kind of lift some of the stress off of the students, which is really great. So even if it's not emergency resources, just reminding students of whatever resources might exist out there, because, as we know, once you get stressed out, it's a little bit harder to think about and make those really logical and, prioritize plans or think about some of the resources you might have access to. So that's definitely a way. I would also say one of the things that I started to do with students, especially once ETV, the Education Training Voucher money came out, was to give them little reminders along the way. So maybe a student isn't in crisis or isn't too deep in the weeds yet, but we want to make sure to prevent that. So one of the things that our program does is provide an envelope to students and say, hey, keep all of your receipts in here. That way you don't even have to think about it when you need to turn your receipts in at the end of this period. But then also providing a really simple and free, which is always great, resource from our local banks, just the checker transaction register. And I let students know kind of how to use it. Are you comfortable with this? Have you seen this before? And then either if a student like Becca, who as a humble brag is really modest and she's doing a great job with her finances, and when I talked to Becca about it, she was like, oh yeah, I'm pretty good at my finances. And I said, well, maybe we could use this for ETV to track your ETV money instead, because that can be a little bit confusing when that pot of money gets mixed with your checking account and it gets muddy really, really fast. So I think of thinking of creative ways to try to address some of the needs that students have is always great. I hope that kind of answers the question. Those are some things that I personally do.
Yes, it answers the questions. And then I just wanted to really touch on the word reminder that you kept using. I think a little reminder goes a long way. And I think reminders, when someone is in a crisis, can kind of bring them back to just the plain level field where they can actually see clearly. So I think that's a huge thing. And I'm glad that you guys offer that. And I think that it's awesome. And that personally for me, with my campus support programs, that's the #1 thing that helps me when I'm in that crisis. It's just that little reminder that you have resources and will help you get it, or the emergency funds, or reminder, hey, we can figure it out together. So just want to say that that was a great answer to that question.
Awesome. So I have a question for both of you, and I ask this question because I really think, you know, at Fostering Success Michigan, we're in the business of filling gaps that we see along the education to career pipeline, and, you know, doing collaborative problem solving. And so I'm wondering from the both of you, if you had a magic wand and could, you know, maybe do one thing to maybe sort of radically change the outcomes in the finance and employment domain, what would that be? And this is, you know, really it can be, you know, as out there as you want, but just maybe kind of that magic wand question.
So as soon as you started talking, Maddie, I was hoping you would ask this question, because I would say number one, top of my mind, is definitely advocating for legislation and getting legislation passed to extend funding in the state of Michigan for students who experience care. That's something that students talk about a lot. So they're given a lot of funding and support up until the age of 21, and then at 21 we cut it off, when in all reality, virtually any student that comes out of high school, it doesn't matter what their background is, they're not going to complete their college education or a bachelor's degree or those things by the age of 21. That's going to be a rare circumstance. So expecting our students that have experienced foster care and have gone through additional challenges potentially to, you know, meet those requirements or have the funding saved up by the time that they're 21 to complete maybe the last 2 years of their schooling is a little bit unrealistic. It's a question I get from students a lot. And I remind them, hey, this is a really great opportunity to advocate for yourself and your peers, and everybody else that has come before or after you in this process, to extend that funding until hopefully 23 would be really, really great. That would be my hope.
Awesome. Becca, how about you?
Well, if I had a magic wand, I would want to do more than just help finances. But I'd probably plant never-ending money trees everywhere. Because not only could it help out college students, but it could also help out somebody else who maybe needs a little extra money, or maybe even homeless people.
Mm-hmm. I love that. You know, I think the issue, and I'm hopeful that it will start to change in the not too distant future, but this issue around resources ending at 21 or 23, you know, I think that we're at a point now where no matter who you are, no matter what your background is, we understand that you're not at, you know, just complete independence at this point in your early 20s. And really, you know, we know and we talk all the time about how important the interdependence is. And so having financial support, you know, to support this interdependence, to support long-term education goals, I completely agree with. And I think, you know, money trees would be amazing. Let's make that happen, Becca. Let's find them. Because I think that, you know, it speaks to the reality of, you know, we talked a lot about the bills that you have to pay while you're in college, but those bills don't stop when you start to make your way into the workforce, and there's lots of other things, you know, that come up, even things, costs along the way just toward getting a job, right? So having interview clothes and getting to the interview, making sure that you have reliable transportation to take you to your employment, those are kind of the next step pieces, right? And so we still need to have some areas of financial support out there, and understand that lots of people could benefit, not just students with experience in foster care. So I would love to see that legislation, and I know that there's folks that are out there who are really advocating for that to change. And in the interim, you know, we are going to keep making sure that we build that supportive network. So even if the finances go away, the people don't have to. So I really appreciate both your comments on that. So we're kind of winding down, and I just want to say thank you so much, Kayla and Becca. It was wonderful to hear from both of you. One of the things that Kayla mentioned is the getting to know the University of Michigan Flint Empowering My Success Program, and that's available on the Fostering Success Michigan website. I encourage anybody who's interested in learning more about the program, about University of Michigan Flint, that you check that webinar out, learn a little bit more. There's tons of amazing resources for students at University of Michigan Flint, and so we absolutely encourage you to go learn more, check it out, explore that with your students. Becca, thank you so much for taking time out. We know it's a busy school year, and so we want to let you get back to your classes. Best wishes for the midterms and finals that you have coming up, and we hope to see you at an upcoming event in your area soon, or hear from you down the road, and wish you so much success.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. For everyone out there, just want to remind you all that we have many resources related to the finance and employment domain on the Fostering Success Michigan website. That includes our finance and employment domain toolkit. We have our financial aid toolkit. We have our financial aid and higher education guide. This is a step-by-step guide that will take you through all the things that you need to know to maximize your financial aid packaging. Of course, don't forget that the FAFSA is live now. We encourage you to complete the FAFSA as soon as possible, and have a couple resources here to help you make sure that you complete the FAFSA as easily as possible. So check out these resources. Again, FAFSA can be found at fafsa.ed.gov. And if you ever have any questions, of course, we have lots of great champions at the Michigan Department of Treasury with MI Student Aid. So please be sure to reach out to them and ask any questions about resources that you might have heard about and that are maybe you'd like more information on.
And next, we'd like to talk about some upcoming FSM events. We'd like you to join us next Wednesday, October 25th, from 1 to 4 for our Community Collaborative, Finances and Employment, Central Region. This will be at the MDHHS Ingham County and Grand Tower location. For more information on that, you can go to the website. Also, next month is our Life Skills domain, which I'm super excited for. We have our Champions of the Domains webinar series, which is scheduled for Thursday, November 9th from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m., so don't forget to register. We have our Community Collaborative for next month, Life Skills domain, and it's going to be the Wayne County region, and that's Wednesday, November 15th from 1 to 4 p.m. at the MDHHS Wayne County, Western Wayne. And then also, as always, register for these events and stay tuned for our new webinar and our podcast announcements on our news and events page and much more at fosteringsuccessmichigan.com/news and events.
Great, and just a reminder, this recording will be available. We encourage you to watch this, share this, tweet this, and share it on Facebook if you like. And if you like this content and want to see it continue, please consider going to our website and donating now. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon.